Hello, everybody. I'm Justin Crosley.
I'm Travis Campbell.
And I'm Mike Persine, and you're listening to Brew Strong.
Yes, I'm filling in once more for Jamil Zainasheff. And Merry Christmas, or I hope you had a good holiday, probably by the time you get this show, because it's going to be a couple weeks out. But if you're listening live or watching live, rather, on Facebook, welcome to the show. You can enter your questions for us right there. You can also always send your questions to brewstrong at thebrewingnetwork.com. And before we go any further, thanks to our sponsor, Blickman Engineering. Go to blickmanengineering.com, send them a thank you note, or more importantly, buy some of their cool stuff. They make all kinds of cool stuff. As Big Mike will tell you, he owns all of it, I think.
Uh, most. Like I said,
We could fix
Auto
it.
Sparge,
Yeah.
Riptide,
Mhm.
Rims Rocket.
Mhm.
I mean, what else? I mean, these are. I got an
You got
Anvil
Anvil
Crucible.
fermenter?
I got the fermenter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I've made award-winning beer out of that thing, man. Hiller Meritzen. It's a
That's the
good
name of the
beer.
game right there.
Yeah.
BlickmanEngineering.com. Send them a thanks and send them some cash because they've brought you this show for a long time. And hopefully your beer's gotten better for it. And it's not just these guys and Jamil Zainasheff that you can thank for that. It's the sponsors who bring this show to you. So today we're doing another question and answer, and it's always listener questions, which you can send to brewstrong at thebrewingnetwork.com or be in the chat on Facebook right now. And we love getting listener questions because you guys give us topics that we haven't thought about. You always have different angles about topics we have thought about, and it's just super fun to answer your questions. So, Travis, take it away. You got a
Oh,
first question for us?
do we want to introduce Adrian before we move forward?
That's probably a good idea.
He's back.
Adrian
Hey,
Cook,
I'm here still.
Adrian Cook is still with us from Blue Lake
He
Hops.
waited an entire week.
You go to he did yeah to do the show. We had
The
to
things I
postpone
do
one.
for you guys, right?
Yeah, well, except send beer. Darn it,
Yeah, right.
we're just never gonna let
That's a
you
different
live it
story
down.
I got to tell you still. So,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Adrian Cook is here. You can go to Blue Lake Hops and learn more about Adrian and his products over there. We just did a whole show on that, and it's about getting fresh wet hops year round. Yeah, that's a thing now. So thanks for being here and helping us with our Q&A, Adrian.
yeah, thank you.
All
All
right,
right.
Travis.
Now, our first question is short one. Matt would like to know. I like to sanitize all of my equipment after brew days with Star San, including my mash tun, which I know is unnecessary, but it makes me feel better knowing it's sanitized as well as clean. Will the thin layer of Star San that remains on my mash tun after it dries drop the pH of my mash on my next brew day?
Mm,
Are you making 500 milliliter samples?
of beer?
No. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the so my interpretation of this is if he's following the sanitation steps for Star San, you let it you don't rinse it, right? You let it kind of dry
Right.
there. Um
But you do drain
the,
it.
you do drain it, right? You're not going to
Right.
let it like puddle up, but I would, I mean, this is where it's kind of tricky because I wish I could quantitatively tell him exactly how little acid there is in this tank, but
Right.
you're gonna have to take my word for it that the volumes of water you're using and the amount of alkalinity probably in that water that you are filling that tank with is going to quickly neutralize any small, tiny, insignificant amount of acid that was left on the sidewall of your tank.
Well, and also something to consider I want to throw out there is once you drain and it dries, it will start to decompose.
Mm.
So that is my understanding of Star Sand specifically is over time it will break down and produce a sugar that I believe that the yeast can consume.
I've not heard
But then
that.
any kind of acidity, typically that will be gone. You probably won't even have much of a residue, but yeah, the alkalinity of your water alone will neutralize any little tiny bit that's in there.
Yeah, it's just poof.
Right.
Not to
It's the
mention,
Now
same
we want
with
to find out
actually
what that sugar is.
it's actually the same I would argue with PBW. People get really wound around the axle about PBW and what's it going to do to my water because that's the one that like you can actually feel it on your hands
Yeah.
and like you can like oh man this is way not good. Um, as long as you're drying that tank or draining that tank and you know you're rinsing it well, and I always like to do the field test with my hands. Any residual PBW, and that's on the other side of the pH scale, right? You're on your alkaline side. You're not going to have enough residual not to affect the pH of any process at all. Like we're talking about is, I mean, if you have the
So
correct
yeah.
alkalinities and all these things that you need to have to be able to produce the right,
Well, he's asking about Star Sand too, right?
yeah,
Right.
and it's the
Yeah,
same
so
for what I'm trying to say is
we got a 2 for Adam, Mike. I
any
appreciate that, Mike.
I'm like expanding our horizons.
Mhm.
Sanitizer, I think, is real quick. No, and then I wanted to also throw in there that PBW also no.
Yeah.
As long as you're rinsing and doing everything and getting even when you do that field test to see if it's actually hydrolyzing and saponifying the oils on your skin, you're not gonna you're gonna be good. You're gonna be fine. The beer's gonna come out great. You're gonna hit all your pH numbers. You're gonna make great beer.
Also, just like, what's the alternative? If you're going to use the Star Sand, which you shouldn't in the mash, doesn't matter. If you're
Yeah.
going to use it, the alternative to not leaving it there is to introduce
Right.
something you already sanitized. So,
Yeah.
in other words, if you're going to go through the process of the Star Sand, just leave it in there. But I personally, I'm cheap, so I'd save the money and just, I'd just hand
Not sanitized.
mash
The,
tun. using
the,
my
la- the
fingers
last
and everything.
last little comment I'd say is sanitizing is not important. Cleaning out the residual sugar
There you
and
go.
residue and solid matter out of all those little crevices. Actually, the big one is in the pipes of like
Mhm.
your pumping system and stuff. That those are where the mold's going to grow, and mold and bacteria produce off flavor, which then it won't contaminate the beer, but it will transmit flavor
Hmm.
to your beer that can make it taste like dirty socks or
That's good to
moldy.
know. That's an
Very
excellent
good.
point. If you've
Yeah.
ever drank draft beer at a dive bar, you know the flavors that Mike's talking about.
Yeah, so that's where you got to get those things out. You got to take apart your brewing equipment every couple brews and just to get into the fundamentals of home brewing is like, yeah, you got to. It's not so much the sanitation; it's the lack of
Cleaning.
brewing matter in your pipes and your tanks and stuff.
Yeah.
In the threads of the NPT fittings that you're using and stuff like that.
And the ball valve,
Good
all of
stuff.
that.
Ball valves, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and the
All right.
ball valves, make sure that you crack those part way because there's always a little bit of fluid that gets stuck in there.
Yes.
Good point. Good
And that
point.
seal.
Yeah,
Especially
and
as a
then
3-piece valves.
yeah, I'm the big one. I love to take apart the rims rocket that I use to heat my mash tun, and that's always full of stuff. It's like, holy crap. Wow, I did not think that would have that in there. And so yeah. That's the big
All
one.
right.
Sanitizing, don't do it.
All right. So
End of rant.
you have more time to rant. Don't worry. I've got
Yeah.
some lined up here you might want to rant on.
Well, in that
Ready for the next
case,
one?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let me throw in there though too. The next time you brew, you're gonna be boiling, which is gonna sanitize.
Well, he's talking about his
it.
mash done. Yeah, but and you don't want some
Yeah,
of this
he's
stuff.
still
If the
pasteurized.
flavor
It's the mash
develops,
done.
it's gonna be there anyway. You know, like Mike's saying, the flavor's there. You're not gonna boil up the flavor. But yeah, don't worry about it. The long short answer is don't worry about the residual star sand that ends up where you didn't need it in the first place. It's
Yeah,
gonna be
don't
fine.
worry about it. Don't worry about it. Hey, you got bigger fish to fry. You know what I'm saying?
And thanks
Bada bing,
for your
bada
question,
boom.
by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Clayton emails. And don't jump to your answer because it's a really broad question, by the way. Do I want to try to get to 75 ppm calcium? This is pretty broad. I have heard that this is good for the yeast, but then I also hear that snowmelt cities and countries, yeah, make beautiful lagers and have wonderful water for brewing, and I'm guessing they don't have 75 ppm calcium. I do brew the spectrum of beers, but if we're focused on light-colored styles, can you give some guidelines on the calcium sulfate chloride for a Helles, Hop Your Continental Pilsner, and then also a West Coast IPA? And he goes on to give you the algebra question of I have started off with this much calcium and chlorides. Is that fine for Helles, etc.? Or RO and 3 grams of chloride. Uh, so Clayton, we can address a good bit of this, but some of this we don't have the answers. Like, is this a 5 gallon batch or a 10 gallon batch? So we can just give you some guidelines on a Helles. And Mike, I'm assuming your lager and your IPA, they have different water profiles. Good assumption.
Calcium specifically is all about yeast health. Calcium is a micronutrient. It is necessary for the yeast to replicate and ferment the beer. The consensus that I understand it to be is 50 ppm is kind of the minimum calcium you want your brewing water to have. Now, there's going to be a lot of calcium contributed from the malt. This is going to be also dependent on the amount of other things you're doing, but in terms of that, I mean, usually that's pretty easy to get to. I mean, I will say, from the Alpine resident on this podcast, I live in the Sierra Nevadas. The water that even comes out of my tap is very deficient in calcium, and so I usually fortify it with calcium chloride, calcium sulfate. And I actually read this question too. He was talking about the balance between sulfite and chloride, and actually, so the calcium content is going to be for yeast health. That sulfite chloride is going to be where your flavor is, where, that ratio
Right.
is where it's, and if you have very soft water, like you have very low calcium, you probably have low chlorides, low sulfates. You actually are very fortunate as a brewer to be able to build this water profile the way you want. And then you can kind of, like, for me, I feel very blessed to live where I live, where I pretty much have alpine snowmelt for my water, and I can take it any direction I want. So I would say that calcium for yeast health, sulfate and chloride are the flavor, like sharpness for softness versus, and again, I always bring it back to the Brew Strong OG, John Palmer. He talks about water chemistry as the seasoning on the steak, right? If you have a good piece of meat, it's going to taste good. It's just, if you could push it that little less, by that perfect amount of seasoning on there, is where you're gonna win.
Yeah. So Adrian, I'm thinking you might have a little bit of perspective like I have, but in some additional thoughts for sure. And that, as Mike was saying, 50 is like your base minimum calcium. That's what's in Beersmith. 50 is your minimum for calcium.
Yep.
So that's usually my target. And his brief question on sulfate, yes, he should really have some sulfate in there. And getting back to Beersmith alone, I mean, I really like the product. I use it. You don't need to use it. You can use brewing water. Both products can give you profiles that will get you a good beer if you want to push it to it. If you're trying to do the seasoning and you find that your water is just not getting it done, look to one of those two for some profiles. My advice on it. Other part of that is brew the beer, see what's missing, and maybe if your yeast is having a hard time finishing, look at a little more calcium. Again, I wasn't trying to steal your thunder, Adrian. So, as a pro brewer back there, what can you add on top of this?
I'm a glorified home brewer is more like it, but
That's better.
so what I would say, as far as specifically looking for the profile for a Helles, and if you have low mineral content, like Michael said, I mean, you can build it up. That's fabulous. I don't strip my water. I have very high calcium here. I want to say I'm around, I think it was like 145. I think the important thing is to find that balance that you can get your chloride and sulfate ratios. Again, just like John says, it's your seasoning. So when you have your calcium, that does your yeast health, and then balance that out, because I also have a high chloride content. So my beers tend to be more on the malt side. So I have to add some sulfate to pretty much all of my beers to balance them out. But for my Helles, I already had a high calcium and a high mineral content. So, but it's about balancing it. As long as you're not too crazy with the amount of mineral you put in there. I think the thing as a home brewer, I mean, when you're like, the thing that trap I fell into is like, you're measuring these grams and half a grams, and you'll go freaking nuts trying to figure out all that stuff. If you want to do that to yourself, all the more power to you, but throw it in one of those programs, get something close. It'll make beer. And again, just like Trevor said, whatever that's missing, then you adjust it from there.
Yep.
My only addition is that we here at the Brewing Network are beersmith. We're a beersmith house, ladies and gentlemen.
Mm.
The recommended software officially from the Brewing Network is go to beersmith.com and use Beersmith brewing software.
I have
Do it.
used it.
Do it
since
now.
version
Do it.
1.
What are you waiting for? Go. Buy it.
Exactly.
Very nice.
All right, gentlemen.
Making
Why don't
Hellas,
we
right?
take
I
a-
had to do the little bit of,
No, I'm here for it. I love it. In fact, I want you to do an entire Beersmith live read for me in the not
we have the malts and the hops.
Now, the real trick was to be if you could get Brad Smith to do that kind of an accent. That'd be pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
now that'd be
There you
great.
go.
Be worth having him on for that. All
Right.
right, folks. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Brew Strong, a Q&A show. Join the chat if you're in Facebook, and you can ask us a question or send your questions to beersmith@thebrewingnetwork.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Brew Strong. We are still hanging out here with our friend Adrian Cook and answering your listener questions. Travis, what else you got for us today?
All right. Ed writes, "Hi guys, my name is Ed. I love your show,
Hi, Ed.
and I'm a fan of both John and Jamil. Sorry to disappoint you today, Ed. I have been all grain brewing on and off for about 15 years, and I am coming off of a 3-year brewing hiatus. My financial situation has improved over the last few years, and I decided to buy a 20-gallon Blickman Brew Easy. We love you for that.
Attaboy.
I just brewed
Nice.
20 gallons of a milk stout that I will be splitting up into 5 different 4-gallon batches and adding different adjuncts to each. I'm about to rack into kegs, and I have tasted the beer, and it is not good. Sorry. I know that carbonating can change the flavor greatly. The beer is super tannic and almost sour. I feel that I may have mashed too long and too hot. I mashed at 156 for 90 minutes in a 90-minute boil. I test my water with a Lamont test kit and check mash pH. I'm not ruling out a possible infection as my process is a little rusty. I am also fermenting in 1/6 barrel kegs. Could that be a problem? I also used separate yeast starters for each beer. I guess my question is, could you guys do a show that can walk us through properly using this system along with properly navigating Beersmith for this system? Also, any comments on the info provided would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for the great show and books, Ed. Ed, we're not going to give you a show, but you can invite us to brew with you, and we could walk through brewing with you at your house. And of course, we'll take some beer back home with us.
I wish he'd have given us that mash pH.
Yes, yeah, that would have helped. That would help us with the tannic, obviously.
And
yeah.
then tannic can be also misconstrued as lactic. They get that
Be acidified
astringent,
too much.
sour. Yeah, and it's tannic. It's like, no, that's lacto.
Well, I mean, you
Right.
take a tea bag and stick that in your mouth, and the
Right.
actual kind you buy in the store, and
And that's what I'm saying is like a lot of
that'll tell you what
Yeah.
tannic does on your tongue.
Right.
right.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is like there can be misinterpretations of tannic versus contamination because he's speculating that's one or the other.
He says
he's saying
tannic
tannic and sour.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
sour. So that's where like when the sour comes in, like you get a vinegar or a lactic. That's it. That's lights out. There was a cleaning problem. I mean, my
So we
whole
can.
thing
Do
is-
you want to rule out his first question? He said, "Could I have mashed too long and too hot?"
Yeah, I
You
don't
did-
think it was too long or too hot.
Too hot is
Um,
like you got to be plus 170, and then
Yeah.
your pH usually has to go over 6.
Mhm.
If I'm being
Yes.
totally so to really extract the tannins, you got to be 170 or over 6, and it doesn't sound
So
like.
a lo-
I mean, especially because he said he checked his pH at the mash, and
He also
then
says he has a Lamont
156
test kit, but he
is-
doesn't
yeah,
tell us about his water. So I mean, if his water is really hard, he might have started off with a really high pH, and then
Pause.
yeah, he's got a
See, that's
kit.
where
And he has
I
told us
wish I had
details.
that number. Yeah, that's like
Yes.
But the other one that really kind of fermenting in kegs is tough
Yes.
because they
Mhm.
are old and the fittings could be I always think the most dangerous time to ruin your beer is when you knock out. This is sugar wort. It's totally full of bacteria food. and you're trying to keep it from being contaminated. And so if you're going into an old keg, you know, so that's
And
where,
I don't know
That's
about
what
you guys, but kegs are the hardest thing for me to clean. Of everything I have to
yeah,
clean,
I
kegs.
can't get in there. I can't make sure everything's, and then
Right. Especially
they're
six
usually
barrel.
old
Yeah.
as the hills. You know, they're
You've got
old
to
soda
totally
kegs,
tear them
and
apart and replace all the O-rings that are
Yeah.
in there.
and the
If
yeah,
little
you have your old
springs and
O-rings, you could have
And
anything.
he
yeah,
and he says sixth barrel, so I don't know if he's talking pros. And those guys
yeah,
have that
sixtels, yeah.
that's got the spear. I don't even want to think about trying to clean a spear. Throw that thing away, get a new one. I mean, at least with the corny, I have
What? And
stock of
here's another
O-rings.
thought. Here's another thought. He's a home brewer. Does he even have the ability to take apart the Sankey
Spear. Yeah.
valve and that spear? Yeah, to
I'm
clean
I'm
it
guessing
properly.
I'm thinking he means corny kegs. I don't think they're.
Okay, he's
But
talking.
even that's the same thing. So I was thinking that, and I'm like, it has too many valves and too many parts, and
Hmm.
okay, but a pro brewery has valves and parts and pieces all over the place. But the difference is, right, and I think this is what you guys are saying, that stuff's just easy to take apart and throw in a bucket and get clean. The corny keg, you have to take apart those two posts entirely every single time. Try to get in there to make sure there's no matter. And then, because don't forget, you have to clean before you sanitize. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. You're just sanitizing clumps of garbage. And so, yeah. And he does admit, by the way, in Ed's defense to himself, he says, hey, I may have an infection because my process is a little rusty. So I think we're just giving some good common sense stuff here. Nowadays, you don't have to spend all that much money for a really decent fermentation vessel. Yeah, Anvil over at Blickman, but even
that thing.
even some of the more rudimentary ones have come a long way. So yeah, I would suggest getting. I think, guys, it's an infection, right? And then my first thing, if he's got a brand new Brew Easy, and hopefully he's using that right, but that's the hot side anyway. You got to fix the cold side
Well,
and make it as simple as possible, in my opinion.
and hear me out too. As soon as that wort gets below, let's say 120,
Mm.
you're in the danger zone. Like you are dealing with a liquid that is completely conducive to biological growth. And so if you have the
That's what
lid
you've
off of
made.
your, let's say he was doing a in kettle chilling with a wort chiller. If he left the lid off and it gets down to 70, 80 degrees and he forgot about it for a half hour, he's just inoculated that with bacteria.
Mhm.
Because I would argue, and then I remember there was one episode actually on Brew Strong where they talked about they went and they did all this stuff, and it turned out it was because during his chilling he had a fan going, and it was just blowing bacteria into his
Mike, I did that
kettle.
one time. You never let me live it down.
I know, and so the thing that I always really for my process is as soon as we drop below that temperature, that's game on for sanitizing at the high sugar, high pH. You are completely primed for bacteria or mold to just take off, and that's why finished beer is actually like low pH, high ethanol, low
Hmm.
sugar. These are actually, and then if you're hoppy, right? Because we talked about last episode, hops are antiseptic. I mean, these things happen to prevent microbial growth, but that moment right before you transfer is where you got to really mind your P's and Q's.
And by the way,
Absolutely.
he's splitting into 5 different 4-gallon
Yeah, see, then that's like,
Mhm.
So that's
are all those hoses
5
sanitized? Is
different
all those
chances.
valves and everything he was hooking up? Oh man, that's a mess
And
to
so
keep.
that's kind of why I go back to, like, you're just getting back into this. Let's keep it simple on the fermentation side. And then once you got that down, you go crazy with your multiple batches and whatever you want to use, because you'll know
Yeah.
you'll be back in practice. That's all.
Yeah, it's a confidence building exercise when you come back in.
All right.
Don't take on the marathon. Run the 5K.
I've always said like the practice part is what it's one of the most important part. And it's one of the reasons I always sucked at brewing. I can tell people how to brew. I can spew back all the information I've learned over the 20 years, but you put me in a brew house and it's like anything. It's like sports. It's like you have to practice it because of all the like little dumb things that come up along the way. And it is always just that, like anything else.
Yes.
And if you're not practiced at dealing with that, your beer is going to suffer. So I've always been like fairly adamant. There's a reason Jamil, was so award winning. He was out there brewing every week.
Ninkasi, bro.
Yeah, Nathan, Tasty McDole. The Brewing Network names that you know and trust. It's not just that they learned a bunch; it's that they practiced every week. They just kept on.
Yeah,
yeah.
You can read a book about hitting a baseball.
Yeah,
it's another thing to hit the baseball.
Yeah, even the best hitters in the world, if they don't practice every single day.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
not
that's
saying
what I'm
you got to
saying.
brew
Like,
every day, but like
Barry Bonds could probably talk to your ear off about hitting the baseball now, but he's 50 and he can't do it anymore, right? It's like,
our coaches are born. They stop hitting every day. So,
but I'm just saying, I'm agreeing with you.
Right.
Like this whole practice makes perfect.
So Mike, but different Mike. Mike sends greetings. I have just finished all the Brew Strong podcasts. I'm sorry if I have either missed the answers. Yes, we were. All right. Final gravity fermentation questions. First, is there a source for the fermentability of specialty grains? Gentlemen, I swear I didn't try to make a theme with this Q&A, but we have a similar answer here. This would be helpful in figuring out final gravity, I figure, and know when it has reached full attenuation. Second, is there a way to determine fermentability of a wort based on mashing temperature? I always hear you talk about how higher mash temperatures produce longer chain sugars that are less fermentable, but never heard specifics in terms of results of the final gravity. Is there a graph somewhere out there? He goes on, as much as perceived dryness, sweetness is talked about, I still don't quite understand how to affect that while brewing and can't get past final gravity indicating sweetness/dryness. I am sorry. I know you've spoken about this 500 million times. We'll make it 500 million one just for you, different Mike. And Mike appreciates our times. He sends a link for you and JP to watch, Justin. I think it's a dead link, and that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I've never in the history of the brewing clicked on a listener link. You don't do that.
Well, I didn't try.
Yeah, you're like, it's asking for a friend. Might be a dead link. Yeah.
All right. So Adrian, let's start with you, if you don't mind. Where do you go to determine the fermentability of special grains?
I mean, there's so many variables when you're throwing in like your different malts, caramel malts, and so on. I think the main thing is, I mean, yes, when you're at a higher temperature, the enzymes are not breaking down the starches into the smaller bits. So if you think of, I use the analogy of when I was growing up, we used to heat our home with wood, and my dad was the one with the chainsaw, and he was cutting up the tree into great big chunks, and then I was going around and taking the little pieces so I could move them. So that's your difference in temperature and fermentability. So when you have your lower temperature, you're getting a lot more smaller, simpler sugars that will ferment all the way. At your higher temperatures, you have more of those longer chains that just, the yeast, it's too big to ferment. But then when you throw in the yeast variability and what can the yeast do? I mean, different yeasts can metabolize different sugars. So that's another layer to it. So I think, I mean, I honestly just go with it, man. Whatever you put in there, if you got a lot of caramel malts, if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for something dry, go for the lower temperature. But the real important thing is that you get full attenuation, that it has fermented everything that it can, and you don't try and jump the beer too soon and it's not really done fermenting.
Right. So his question, and we mentioned honestly on this show, Beersmith has numbers on the grain, and you can get the number on the grain yourself, but then you're doing a hand calc. That's, if you're asking us this question, you probably don't want to do the hand calc. I don't want to do the hand count.
Are you talking about a fine grind dry basis though? Like you're talking about extractability?
No, like no, not just well, yeah, sure. That tells you the difference between a fine grind and a regular grind. I mean, like you might get a pale malt that's 1038 at a fine grind, 1037 at a normal grind, but you get that number for all malts, not just for your base malts.
Yeah.
Now, you can do the long form calc and get your fermentability off of that, which then you'd have to, as Adrian's saying, had to come back and adjust that for temperature. That's the number you're going to get at a lower mash temp. You're not going to get as good of a number at a higher mash temp. Sorry, your final gravity number based off of that. That potential number 1037 won't come as low. Fermentability is.
Oh, I would go ahead. Sorry, I'll get next.
Yeah, so I mean, you have the sugar content in there, and it Beersmith will do the calculation for you, so you don't have to do it.
It'll get you
Yeah,
darn close enough, right? Like anything closer than that, and you are a more professional home brewer than I've ever met.
I have this 2-word sentence called forced ferment, and Jamil would talk about forced fermentations a lot. And so what if you were really concerned about the fermentability of the wort that you produced, and let's say you're using specialty malts in excess of 15%, I don't know where you're going. Usually what happens with me is my malt bills are those are very specialty malts, right? Like even in the darkest of dark beers, these are tiny pieces of the pie. You can do force ferment where you throw a little bit of the same yeast that you're using in your beer, and you ferment that in a stirred condition, or at least you stir it several times a day for several days at room temperature.
Right, warmer temperature,
and push it as hard as you can, and see where that ends up, and that's like your goalpost versus what ends
I
up
do
being
that for every batch.
Yeah. So there you go. That's a home brewer right there telling you that he does it every freaking time. And so, in terms of fermentability of specialty grains, my whole thing is the sugar content, or at least even the gravity contribution of special grains is such a small piece that it's not going to affect the alcohol. I mean, see, this is where I'm trying to be practical, is like you can do all that stuff and chase it down and try to figure it all out. It's like, but if you're using, a couple ounces of chocolate malt for your stout.
Yeah. Time on other things.
This beer is not going to be more than a point or two off on alcohol than you thought. I don't know. You see how like you kind of get, again, you're getting wound around the axle about things that, are kind of make the beer. If it was too low, make it again. Throw a little bit more base malt in there. Bam.
I think another thing too is if kind of going back to what we said before, the more you brew, the more you like kind of know your process, but then you also really start to learn your ingredients and your yeast. Like when you start using like the same yeast batch after batch, you know where it's going to finish for you. I mean, they are so freaking consistent. And if you're not what you're expecting, then it's like, okay, what's happening? I actually just did this, and
that's an excellent point.
I have a beer. I'm like, is it really done or not? I'm expecting it to be lower, but it's a peanut butter beer. I've made it many times, but I'm like, is it really done? So I pulled it out to try and do a forced ferment to see if is it really done. Nope, it's not. So I'm just gonna let it keep riding.
Go.
Good point.
All right, so different mic. Keep brewing and you're going to learn your yeasts. If you don't like where it's finishing, you can let it run a couple extra days unless you're in a rush and find out if it's done. And, next time cut a couple of days off. And if it's not the same, then you probably cut it too short. Force ferment. There's a handful of ways you can learn about the process. You can, even with the best calculators, they're not going to match your process, but you can get a good head start with the right software, which again, I had no intention of pimping Beersmith so hard today.
It's all right.
But there we are.
They deserve it.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
I think there are indicators. I mean, even just flavor. Like, just try the beer. Is it done? Does it taste sweet? These can be indicators that you're not ready. But we're talking about specialty malts again. Keep things in perspective, man. Your base malt is the contributor fermentability. Like that. your Maris Otter, your all these beautiful things that you're doing with your pale malts, your Pilsner malts. I got guys that make stouts with Pilsner malt. I mean, that's where the sugar is coming from. The color and the flavor is coming from your specialty malts, but they should be tiny little pieces of where you're going. So,
And if they are large pieces of where you're going, that's a problem, probably.
yes,
That's if you're finding sweetness an issue, if you're finding that, I would just say that, and then maybe we can let them be. But yeah, if you're using, 30% of something that's wheat adjunct, then that's an issue too. And then of course you'd want to know about its fermentability. But no, use them as little sprinkles, as in making a pie, man. Yeah.
All right. So do we want to take the next one now? Or do we need to take a break, or we're good on time?
Yeah, let's take. You got one that's a shortish one?
Well, the one I'm looking at, we'll go past the break reading it alone. The answer might be okay, but it's
well. Then let's take a quick break. You're listening to Brew Strong Q&A. You can send your questions to brewstrong@thebrewingnetwork.com or join us in the chat room when we're live on Facebook, like we are right now. All right, hang in there. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Brew Strong. You're listening to us do our Q&A show, and please feel free to send us your questions in the live chat right now. Travis, what's up next?
All right. From George. Dear Brew Strong, I apologize for the length of this email, but I need your help, and you'll need my background information to understand. I have an infection problem that I've been chasing for months and need more ideas on how to eliminate it. I haven't been brewing.
That's usually back on my show. This is where we either hang up on the caller or throw away the email.
Hey, you gotta go. You gotta use condoms, man. Use a condom, man.
Anyway,
sorry.
Better safe than sorry.
And George, this is all good advice so far, but I'm sure we have not solved your problem, which we'll give it a shot.
Yeah, this information is useless.
I haven't been brewing frequently, so I've had several beers sitting on tap for up to 8 months at a time. A few months ago, I noticed that my beers were all starting to taste the same. The malt became more pronounced, the hop aroma and flavor disappeared, and eventually the beer began to have very slight sour acidic taste. I replaced a bunch of my potential contaminated material. I replaced ball valves, pre and post boil. I replaced tubing between the kettle and the fermenter. I replaced all the gaskets on my fermenter and my serving kegs. I usually ferment in a keg. Well, we have themes today. I brewed a batch of pale ale, Tasty's APA. When I transferred the beer to the serving keg, it smelled wonderful. I force carbonated and I put it in the fridge, not connected to CO2. A few days later, I tasted it good, but it was undercarbonated. So I connected it to the CO2 and tasted it again a few days later. Within 2 days, it had changed. The aroma was gone and was slightly sour. Maybe we pause there because it's a smoking gun, I would say.
Good idea.
I'll come back to the rest of this after he's just said we started off at 8 months. Now we're down to 2 days and we're going to problems with the beer. And all he's done is he's carbonated it. Mm-hmm. It's already in the keg. So did he pick up
There's
enough
a couple
of an
things I've
infection?
got. There's a couple things I've got. If he's the 8 months, it seemed like he got a little bit more sour. I mean, that's just oxidation and just age. It's just not.
That's what I was thinking.
Going to shit. The carbonation could be a couple things. I mean, sometimes when you over carbonate a beer and it's very cold, I've had this problem in this guy right here. It'll actually come out a little acidic because I feel like there's so much solubility of CO2 at that low temperature. Like I keep this thing near freezing. I try to keep it low, but that can give a perceived sourness. Oh, sorry. Say again.
I think he said he was undercarbonated, so he carbonated.
He was undercarbonated. It was okay. Then he carbonated, and then within 2 days of carbonating, it didn't taste good already.
Yeah,
that's when the aroma was gone. It was slightly sour.
Something like the sourness.
So honestly,
if you are sorry, go ahead.
I'm honestly, unless he's having a very cold sample, which the aroma will be gone. I mean, maybe his CO2 is not coming from a reputable CO2 vendor,
There's
and
not
it's
gonna be any
oxidizing
biology in there, though.
No, oxygen. a low ppm of oxygen oxidizing takes his
yeah,
APA
ruin.
in a 2-day period of carbonating while oxygenating.
Yeah, it
Oh,
sucks.
he's
I'd be
getting
so
sour and acidic taste though. I mean, I'm leaning toward he's fermenting in those kegs
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
the other person did. Um,
Yeah.
I'm really suspicious of something. He said he replaced the parts, but I guess let me share my home brewing infection story. I was fermenting in glass, and then I had a batch of beer. I'm like, that doesn't taste right. I made another batch, put it in there, and I'm like, this is tasting worse. And then by the time I got the third time, it was nasty as fuck. So I
Mm.
dumped it out, and I was looking at the glass. I mean, everything looks clean, but then I saw that I had mineral deposits that were forming, and that was protecting the bacteria so
Mhm.
that would then get into my beer. So I had to acid treat everything to get rid of that calcium layer. So that's where I'm almost wondering, like, for using these old kegs and fermenting in, how are they cleaning them? And even if it's PBW, that might be cleaning any kind of like surface level things like that. But if there's like a calcium layer that's in there, that could be protecting some bacteria that is then slowly infecting what he's having over a couple of days. I mean, I wouldn't think that the infection rate, everything past that.
Yeah.
But once he's in that keg, if there's something in there and then just takes some time to grow, like the yeast is done fermenting and then the bacteria kicks in, and that's when it's starting to get funky. That's my first guess.
I agree.
Or
Is
even
the
like a
bacteria
Brett.
gonna grow
If there's a
that
Brett in
fast?
there, it'll fuck it up.
You got to
I mean,
go
if
with
you're
with
talking
the
about
simple part first. I just totally agree. Yeah, okay. Y'all have cleaned the corny kegs before. You got to put beer in there.
Mm.
I have some really, really ridiculously, freakishly long arms, and it is hard to get to the bottom of those corny kegs.
I get stuck right
and
here.
again, I just don't approve of the taking apart of the posts of the ability to really, when you take apart, get those posts super clean. Now, of course, you should clean them. You got to put clean beer in there, but that very sweet wort that's going into them that just makes them even more and more.
That's the height of the danger zone.
And
if
the other
there's
thing,
a more crucible moment where you have to be completely sanitary.
Okay, so there is
If
a
you're
new wrinkle,
not,
and
yeah,
so George did give us a little more backstory. So he did do a brand new plastic carboy, had the same effect.
and
So
that's where
That could be like
and I want to go back to
plastic or rubber that he has somewhere between the hot side to cooling.
yeah, the knockout.
how much bacteria
what's
can he
he's got
pick up,
knocking out?
and how fast is it going to grow to ruin a beer in 2 days?
But no, knocking out is like because he says the beer's good coming out when he knocks it out.
Yeah,
Or racks it,
This
excuse me.
grows on finished beer. Whatever's happened is happening to finished beer. I think a lot of
Does
it's
he have-
oxygen on every single one of these. I think that's what he's.
Yeah.
I think the drop in the hops up in the maltiness is oxidation. Now, is he really souring in 2 to 3 days? Is a question.
I
Now,
think
when
the
he's
sourness
fermenting
could
those
be
kegs, it could
perceived.
be.
It could be a
Yeah.
perceived sourness from carbonation.
So it's really just oxidation.
Well, I think the loss of flavor, obviously, yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably. But then the big one that might be like, oh, this is so. It's like I have beers even now right out of my fridge. If it's down below freezing, 28 degree F, and you got 2 or 3 volumes on that, it's gonna be pretty sour, right? I mean, there's actually wastewater treatment plants that use carbonation to drop pH, like on purpose. Like we call it carbonation for pH control. So I mean, there
That's
are
a
things we're
nifty
doing,
name.
huh?
That's a nifty
Yeah,
name.
no, up here
Carbonation
in
for
Truckee,
pH control.
Tahoe, and Truckee, they use carbonation for pH control. It's actually pretty cool. They
Yeah.
use the flume gas from their boilers, so they're burning natural gas, and then the CO2 is then reused. It's really cool. Anyway, sorry.
Peter threw out penicillin, aka a bacterial infection. I just go back to how fast is it going to grow? I don't do sour fermentation. I don't do sour.
They take a long time.
Yeah, especially when on a finished beer, which is the case of the carboy.
Yeah.
And growing alongside the yeast is going to outpace it. I mean, unless he's doing 3 weeks primary/secondary before he does anything. Yeah, but it's finished beer with very little sugar left. Well,
Well, and the fact that he used a brand new fermenter, I
Yeah.
was reading the question again, brand new
Yeah.
fermenter, and then he puts it into the keg that he replaced the gaskets. That's all.
Mhm.
There's got to be something on the cold side that's not getting clean, and that's where if you have any kind of mineral deposits, that makes it hard to even see it. It looks clean.
Yeah.
You can't see it as well. So the only way to get around that, if it's something that's related to that, because the beer that I made, it did turn very quickly as well. It's like once it was all done, then it was a short amount of time that went. But in order to get rid of that, you have to acid wash it.
Yeah.
Temperature. Boil everything.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
That's another way to do it, though, is temperature sanitation.
So one of the
oh
things
yeah, bring a temperature up. Yeah.
I want to add on to that one, because I had, when I first started here at the brewery, everything was infected. Everything.
Oh God. What a mess.
So like when they're like, Adrian, look in this fermenter. What is that? I'm like, that's gross. It's not okay.
That's biofilm.
So
man.
We grow at the wastewater treatment plant.
well, so ultimately what I did was I was more a glorified home brewer then when I first started compared to what I have now, but I heat pasteurized everything. Absolutely everything. Tear everything apart and get it up to 160. That will heat pasteurize it in a short amount of time. You want to be careful with your plastics, because if you start going above that, you start breaking them down. But I still stick to that. I use PBW to clean, but I get things up to 160 to make sure anything that's in there is dead.
You could also, if you want to, sometimes it's easy to throw a little money at the problem. If you're putting it into this same corny keg every time for serving, get another one. Borrow a buddy's who brews great beer. I don't know what. Not that you shouldn't do this cleaning that Adrian just recommended anyway, but you want to like skirt the system for a second and start, just because you've eliminated a lot of problems already, according to the email, including that he's redone his draft system. He said we didn't get to that part too, but he put in a new faucet, he put in new lines, he did all that. So if you use a different serving vessel and you have the same problem, then at least you've narrowed it down yet again. But if the problem goes away, well, there you go. I do, Travis, I guess there could be a CO2 supply thing. I guess there could be something going on that side, but
the oxidation.
That's like the last thing to eliminate. Not what Big Mike said, like this perceived part. Yes, absolutely.
The
that
oxidation
problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, if there's a real infection, that's all I'm saying.
Like oxidation.
No, I'm saying CO2 is the oxidation.
Oxidation ruins hop flavor. It creates that cardboard. You're gonna get browning, like even in a color of the beer. There are very telltale signs for oxidation. Then there's also the telltale signs of infection, and I think we covered it all. So I mean,
absolutely,
go with your gut.
Let me throw this
circle back to what you guys were saying. Circle back to what you guys were saying above. And he's looking at, and you said he replaced everything. He's got a 4-line splitter. Simplify it. You don't have to replace a 4-line splitter. Just bring it down to one system and get new that one system, or clean that one system. Don't worry about 4 kegs, worry about the 1 keg. If you can't get 1 good keg, don't worry about trying to get 4 good kegs. Focus on simplifying, cleaning, and oxygen's getting in there somewhere for him. Somewhere on top of everything else, he's got an oxidation problem.
And heat's your friend. When in doubt, I mean, if you're worried about your sanitizers not getting it, something's going on. Temperature rules, man.
Okay.
And like,
can I tag off from what Justin was saying? One of the things that I did when I dealt with that infection: label your fermenters, label your kegs, keep track of what you're putting into what, because that will help you identify and eliminate all those variables. Switching, like Justin said, get a different keg, but you know what? Number that keg. And the next time you use it, if you dare use
it, fucks the beer up twice. Yeah, she's done.
Yeah, then it's a problem right there. It's so easy to have a bunch of them and you don't know what's left.
Yeah, if you're
final numbers.
Good notes.
Yeah.
Good notes.
My kegs are even numbered, Justin. I'm really going to lose some respect from you. I can see it.
I mean,
you don't have names for your kegs?
No,
like
I've got all my kegs numbered, and I've got a log of when the last time I was to change the gaskets. I really do.
And Bell.
There you go.
They're like a pro. Number or name all of their kegs. We're looking at it. We're looking at fermenter right now.
Fermenter, yeah, F5.
Yeah,
that's a bad tornado. You got to know what you're putting in there.
Yeah.
That's a
Doc, do
bad
we have
that's a bad day if it's a tornado.
time for one more?
One more.
Yeah, so this one, Justin, this is for you, and I was laughing when I read it, but then I think it's much more useful, and I think we probably don't say it enough, and it came up off the air earlier. David recently stumbled on our podcast, and he can't stop listening to them. He's having trouble downloading the past podcast in iTunes, though. He keeps getting an error. Now, that's good news for you if you're still on iTunes, Justin. But so, I mean, you're on Facebook. I use YouTube for my podcast, YouTube Music for my podcast. Where else do people find all the glorious stuff the Brewing Network puts out?
Well, just so you know, yeah, Android and Google like eliminated their Google, I should say, eliminated their podcast aggregator entirely. So if you're used to use Google and that was your favorite, you now have to use YouTube to get your podcast. I just recently
Right.
uploaded all of our shows to YouTube because I didn't know that. I didn't get the memo.
They didn't
So
auto migrate for you because Google owns YouTube.
they did not auto migrate. It took a
Ah,
week because we have so many years of
yeah.
content that it took a while.
so
But
yeah,
anyhow,
that
my
sucks.
guess is that most people use other ones. So
Mhm.
we are on Spotify. Spotify has a weird algorithm, and I'm not trying to pass the buck because I'm honestly, I'm not an expert at this podcast aggregator stuff, believe it or not. It grew faster than I did. We're there, and sometimes it like you can search Brewing Network and it's not there, but if you search the Brewing Network, it's there.
Mm.
Sometimes if you didn't put a space between brew and strong, like there's a bunch of weird variables, which is why, by the way, I always like iTunes. I've never had trouble with it. We should still be on oh, now I'm drawing a blank. I knew it just a second ago. There's another one that people like to use. So every time I learn about a new one, and if you send us an email, you can send it right to me, Justin at thebrewingnetwork.com or Brewstrong at thebrewingnetwork.com. I'll go
Amazon.
add it to that aggregator. Most of them, it doesn't take long to add it. So I will put it
That's good.
where you want it. It's just like keeping up. There's always like a new one. And to me, iTunes is just reliable, and Spotify was reliable, but now that I don't know what it is about their search function, it gets a little funky every now and then. Like literally,
Yeah.
Mike was saying he couldn't find it. It's his own goddamn show, and then the next day he could find it.
Well, no, this was a while ago. I tried to find it on Spotify, and then I ended up over on Google Podcast because
Mhm.
Gone.
I'm an Apple refugee.
Mm.
But I really like Spotify for everything else that I was listening to, and then I was so frustrated that like the really my let's be honest, Bruce Strong's my favorite.
Yeah.
I couldn't find it. Like I was like looking, and I found it today. So it's on there.
Yeah, it's there.
It's
And
on
I'll go
there.
double check again. Like
Yeah.
sometimes what happens too is like they release a new privacy update for publishers.
Yeah.
And you don't click that yes in time,
Oh,
it's gone. They just unpublish you. And that's
they
happened.
shrink wrap you like they shrink wrap us. That's a
Yes.
shame.
Yes.
Like, you click wrap, oh, you got to click on this, or you're going to lose all your files, or you got to click on this, or we don't work with you anymore because we work with everybody and we don't need you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
weird. So not a bad question. And again, I'm not trying to pass the buck. I have screwed this up before. I do have a hard time keeping up with all of the aggregators and what they ask of me. So yeah, I'll go back and do another check again.
Well, David, we really appreciate the fact that you not only listen to us, but you listen to us and want to find out what the heck's going on, not saying, well, I can't get Brew Strong moving on. That's everybody
It's
who writes
like
it. We really love
it's
it.
like that movie Saw. Would you
Mhm.
like to play a game with aggregators?
Yeah.
Uh,
The only reason we ever even became a podcast is because of our listeners, just so you know. So these are, ask us where you want it. We were live streaming radio until someone asked me to make it a podcast. And as soon as I Googled what the fuck a podcast is, we made it a podcast. And so we
Heck
have
yeah.
been ever since. So anyhow, don't be afraid to make suggestions. We try our best to, make it easy on you.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's about the time we have for today's Q&A show. And I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank Blickman Engineering once again for bringing you this show. And in particular, I want to thank our listeners when we do Q&As because, as you can see, there is no content without you asking your questions. And we really like to get them, even when we're stumped, right? Like it kind of makes us rack our brains about things, which probably makes your brewing better too, right, guys? Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, if you want to play Stump the Chump, I'll be your chump. Send it over.
There we go. We got stiff.
I honestly love it because it keeps those gears turning to make sure that, you know, I'm staying up to date. I'm not just getting complacent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Send them all. Let's go.
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of like saying something, you know, you've said it 20 different ways, but then that one last time you say it a little bit differently, it makes more sense to somebody.
Yep.
You know,
Yep. It makes more sense to yourself.
Yeah, it's just like all of a sudden,
say it, it's like, damn, that does make sense.
All right. Also, hey guys, head over to bluelakehops.com if you want to learn about an all new wet hops product. If you didn't listen to that show, it was our last show in the series. And Adrian is your contact point for that. And boy, do they have a cool thing going. So go to bluelakehops.com. And Adrian, thanks again for all your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate being on the show and talking to you guys.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks, good to meet you.
All right, guys, you want to take us out of here? You can do it.
You stumped.
Let's have a good time and brew strong.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.
We'll see you next time.